I'm Michael Martinez, and you're about to listen to an AI generated discussion of my article, Who Are the Members of the White Council? In some of these episodes, the AI hosts sound like they are my biggest fans. That's not intentional on my part. The episode you're about to hear replaced an earlier version because the hosts were so over the top. To address that issue, I've been experimenting with subtle changes in the prompts. I want the AI to acknowledge that I wrote the article for the Middle Earth blog, but this seems to be an all or nothing proposition. Either the AI acknowledges me and heaps a little praise on me, or the article suddenly becomes an anonymous source. I finally got the host to tone it down a little bit in this recording. Another challenge I've been experimenting with is getting the AI host to pronounce elfish names and words correctly. I was finally able to prompt the system to pronounce Círdan, Celeborn, and Celebrian correctly in this episode, but one of the AI hosts keeps mentioning that the initial C in their names is pronounced with a K. So that also seems to be an all or nothing proposition.
Okay, so you've probably seen the movies, right? You know that scene. The White Council gathered together Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, Saruman. It really looks like the ultimate, high-level meeting.
Mm-hmm. The powerful few making the big decisions. It's a very strong image.
It is, yeah. Wisdom, authority, all concentrated there in Middle-earth.
Gives you that sense of a core group, doesn't it? This tight circle working against the darkness.
Exactly. But, it got us thinking. And maybe it's got you thinking, too. Was that really the full picture? Like, did Tolkien actually write down a definitive list, a roster?
Or is there maybe more to it in his actual writings?
Precisely. And that question is exactly what we're going to dig into today. We're using source material you shared with us to really unpack what we know about the White Council straight from Tolkien's texts.
Yeah, maybe challenge some of those common assumptions that come from adaptations.
So our mission here is pretty straightforward. We're looking at this specific source. It's an article by Michael Martinez over on the Middle Earth blog titled, Who Were the Members of the White Council? Yeah.
Great resource.
And we're using that to get a clearer picture of what the texts actually tell us, who was involved, council's history, separating the text from maybe the popular image.
Well, right off the bat, one of the most crucial points Martinez makes in the article is that clear four-person image. That's really an adaptation choice.
Ah, okay.
Tolkien himself, in his published works, never actually gave us a single, complete, definitive list of every single member.
Okay, wow. So that's our first big takeaway then. The neat list we might expect just isn't there in the books.
Not in one place, no.
But the article also brings up something else, kind of surprising. Technically, there wasn't just one White Council, was there?
That's a really fascinating distinction the article pulls out. Yeah. Well, everyone thinks of the Third Age Council, the one dealing with Sauron, Mirkwood, all that.
Right, the famous one.
Tolkien's writings actually mention an earlier council, way back in the Second Age. They're distinct councils, even though some of the same people might have been involved in both, eventually. Our focus today is definitely the Third Age one, the one people know.
Makes sense.
But it's just worth knowing there's that deeper history there.
Okay. And speaking of that Third Age Council, the later one, Martinez's article apparently found something pretty unexpected about its reach, like how well known it actually was.
Yeah, this is really interesting. You might assume it was this super secret group, right? Only the highest echelons knew.
Totally. Like a covert ops team.
But apparently no.
Yeah.
Its existence seems to have been surprisingly common knowledge. Maybe not the details, but the fact of it.
How so? What's the evidence for that?
Well, the article points to a specific passage in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's in the Shadow of the Past, that chapter where Gandalf is explaining the ring's history to Frodo.
Okay, yeah.
And it describes the hobbits in the Shire hearing all sorts of unsettling rumors. Elves leaving Middle-earth, dwarves seeking refuge, whispers about the enemy, about Mordor.
Right, the world getting darker.
And then there's this specific line about a big event. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council.
Wait. Hobbits in the Shire, they'd actually heard of the White Council by name and knew they were involved in driving out the necromancer.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
It's right there in the text. It suggests they weren't completely cut off from world events, or at least that name traveled.
That's pretty wild. It really challenges that image of them being totally oblivious.
It does. And the article backs this up with another little detail from that same Gandalf-Frodo conversation. Frodo asks Gandalf, who is he, when Saruman gets mentioned. He doesn't know Saruman personally.
Okay.
But, and this is the key part, he doesn't ask, what is the White Council?
Ah, Okay, I see. He knows the name of the group, even if he doesn't know its leader.
Exactly. Which strongly implies the council itself, as an entity, was something he'd heard of. It wasn't some totally unknown secret society.
So its existence was like general knowledge, at least for hobbits who paid attention to the wider world.
That seems to be the implication. And the article connects this back to The Hobbit, too. Remember Bilbo learning why Gandalf had to suddenly leave the quest?
Yeah, he had some urgent business.
Right. Bilbo finds out later it was to attend a meeting of great wizards, and that they drove the necromancer out of Mirkwood.
The same event the Shire hobbits heard rumors about.
Precisely. And Martinez confirms in the article that this meeting Gandalf attended in The Hobbit was sort of retroactively identified by Tolkien as the White Council when he was writing Lord of the Rings. He expanded the idea later.
Okay, got it. So the Third Age Council was real, it was known. So now the really big question, who was actually on it? If we stick just to what the article says is explicitly mentioned in the texts, who can we confidently name?
Martinez is careful here, sticking to the explicit links. The names directly tied to the Third Age Council are Gandalf, also called Mithrandir, of course, and Saruman, or Curanir. The article also points out that Galadriel herself is actually stated to have formed this Third Age Council back in the year 2463.
Oh, interesting. So she initiated it.
Seems so. Then there's Elrond, naturally. And finally, Círdan.
Okay, Círdan. Let's pause there a sec for pronunciation, because the source material notes mention this. For those Elvish names starting with C, we're using that hard K sound. So Círdan is pronounced
Círdan, like Cír then Dan.
Círdan. Got it. Good to be clear on that.
Yeah, and he's explicitly named by Tolkien as being a member, according to Martinez's reading.
Okay. So just based on those explicit mentions highlighted in the article, our confirmed list is Gandalf, Saruman, Galadriel, Elrond, and Círdan.
Those are the ones directly linked in the text. Yes,
Okay.
that's the core group the article identifies as definitely being members based on textual evidence.
Right.
And the article also dives a bit into Saruman's role specifically. He was chief of the Astari, the wizards, and he was actually elected head of the council.
Council, okay.
It mentions his deep knowledge, especially about ring lore,
Yeah.
but also, crucially, how his pride started growing along with that knowledge. And Gandalf, well, the article points out, Gandalf felt a sort of growing unease about him, a slight hesitancy.
Yeah, you can see the seeds of that later conflict.
And it was Gandalf Mithrandir who was really the most vigilant, the most suspicious about that shadow growing in Mirkwood. He doubted it was just ring wraiths.
He feared it was Sauron himself.
Exactly. He feared Sauron was returning. Martinez references that event where Gandalf actually went into Dol Guldur, confirmed it was Sauron, and they drove him out for a while. That led to that period of peace before Sauron came back stronger.
Right. So we have those confirmed names, but this is where it gets really interesting because the article argues the council probably wasn't just those 5, right? It talks about who else might have been members.
Yes, this is where the picture starts to expand, moving beyond the explicit names into reasoned inference based on who the wise were. The article brings up Celeborn as a very strong possibility.
Okay, Celeborn. And again, that C's a hard K sound, so...
Celeborn, exactly. Martinez notes that Tolkien describes Celeborn as perhaps the wisest of the Eldar, the elves, remaining in Middle-earth at that time.
Wow, high praise.
Yeah, which makes his inclusion in a council of the wise seem, as the article puts it, almost necessary. It would be odd if he wasn't there.
Celeborns, okay, makes sense. Who else gets mentioned as a potential member?
Glorfindel is brought up, the elf lord from Rivendell. He's certainly powerful and ancient.
Right.
There's also some discussion about Gildor and Glórin and the elf Frodo meets in the Shire Woods. But the article expresses some uncertainty there, whether Gildor was considered high enough among the Noldor nobility to be counted among the chief Elgar, the ones likely forming the council.
So some possible, some less certain. And this really links back to that first point, doesn't it? About the list not being definitive.
Absolutely. The article explicitly calls it a fallacy to assume that just because Tolkien didn't list every single great elven lord as a member, that they therefore weren't members.
Right. Just because they aren't named doesn't mean they weren't there.
Precisely. Tolkien's world has depth beyond what's always on the page. Martinez uses the example from other writings about unnamed elven lords from Tol Rasea visiting Numenor. Important figures exist and act without always being individually named.
So applying that here, assuming the White Council was only the 5 explicitly named is probably, well, wrong.
Likely incorrect, yes, according to this analysis.
So if we can't assume it was just those few, how big does the article suggest the Third Age Council might actually have been? Because this feels like where the picture could change dramatically.
Yeah, this is maybe the biggest shift in perspective the article offers. Based on the likely structure of power among the Eldar, the presence of the Astari, and considering that leaders of major realms would almost certainly be involved, Martinez concludes the Third Age Council could have actually been quite large.
Quite large. Like how large?
He suggests possibly over a dozen, perhaps several dozen elves could have been members, in addition to the wizards involved.
Whoa. Okay, over a dozen. Maybe several dozen. That is a completely different picture than that intimate group of 4 or 5 we often imagine.
It absolutely is. It suggests a much broader body of leadership, potentially drawing from various elven realms and wise individuals.
A much wider council, indeed.
It really moves away from that idea of a tiny, almost secret committee, and towards something maybe more representative of the combined wisdom and authority of the Eldar and Astari. The article also clarifies who exactly falls under that term, the wise, in this context.
Right. Who are the wise that would make up such a council?
The article defines the wise as being the Astari, the wizards, and the chief Eldar, the main elven lords and ladies.
Okay.
And it makes an interesting point about Radagast the Brown here. While Radagast is definitely one of the Astari, and therefore considered one of the wise, the article finds no specific textual evidence to actually place him as a member of the White Council itself.
Oh, okay. So being one of the wise didn't automatically mean you were on the council.
Seems not. Membership might have been more specific than just the general category of wise. The article also gives us a few logistical details, like some meeting dates and locations.
Oh, yeah. What does it say about that?
It lists specific meeting years for the Third Age Council mentioned in the appendices or unfinished tales, 2463, which is when Galadriel formed it.
Right.
Then 2851, 2940, when that's the one during The Hobbit, and 2953.
And location? Did they always meet in Rivendell?
Well, the 2851 meeting is confirmed to have been in Rivendell, based on unfinished tales. But for the 2941 meeting, the one Gandalf left Bilbo for, the article says Tolkien didn't definitively state the location. It suggests it was probably held either in Lothlorien, which makes sense given Galadriel's role, or maybe even Rhosgobel, Radagast's home near Mirkwood, given the focus on the necromancer.
Yeah.
But it's not pinned down.
Okay. So that gives us a really rich picture of the main Third Age Council, who was definitely there, who might have been, its potential size, even some meeting details, all based on Martinez's analysis of the texts. But we started by saying there were technically 2 councils. What about that earlier one, the Second Age one?
Right. The article touches on that briefly. It notes that this Second Age White Council is only mentioned, I think, once in an essay that was later published in Unfinished Tales.
Okay, so less detail available.
Much less. It says it was called by Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, back then, in the year 1701 of the Second Age. This was after Sauron's first big defeat in that era, during the War of the Elves and Sauron.
And where did that meeting happen?
Interestingly, like that later 2851 meeting, this earlier Second Age Council was also held at Imladris Rivendell.
Seems like a popular spot for important meetings.
Definitely a key location. The article lists the attendees mentioned for this council: Gil-galad himself, Elrond, Galadriel, and Celeborn.
Okay, Celeborn again. Pronounce Celeborn. So Gil-galad, Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn. That's the group mentioned for that Second Age Council.
Those 4, yes.
And what was the purpose of that earlier meeting? Was it also about Sauron?
Sort of indirectly. The article explains its purpose was actually quite specific and strategic. They were deciding on elven policy after Sauron's forces had destroyed Eregion, their realm further south.
Ah, the place where the Rings of Power were made.
Exactly. Eregion wasn't easily defended, so they decided to consolidate and shift their main focus north, towards the more defensible valley of Imladris. And it was actually at this Second Age Council meeting that Gil-galad appointed Elrond as his viceroy in that region, Eriador.
Made him his second in command there, essentially.
Basically, yeah, setting up Rivendell as a major stronghold.
Were there any other people noted as being present at that Second Age meeting? Even if not strictly members?
The article mentions one other person, Celebrian.
Celebrian. Okay, another K sound for that C, Celebrian.
Right. She was Galadriel and Celeborn's daughter, and later Elrond's wife. The article notes she was with them at Imladris during that council.
But not necessarily a council member herself.
Exactly. The text notes her presence, but Martinez is careful to point out It does not say she was actually a member of that specific Second Age council.
Okay, so putting it all together, we have these two distinct councils emerging from the text, according to this analysis. A sort of smaller, more focused strategic meeting in the Second Age.
Right, dealing with the immediate aftermath of war.
And then this much longer-lasting Third Age council, formed much later by Galadriel, dealing with the resurgent shadow, and crucially, likely much larger in size and scope than often depicted.
Exactly. And I think that's the main thrust of what Martinez's article on the Middle-earth blog really illuminates for us. The picture of the White Council you get purely from Tolkien's text is well, it's far more nuanced.
Yeah.
And maybe less rigidly defined than the streamlined version we often see in adaptations.
Right. We learned there were potentially these two councils, that the main Third Age one was probably much larger than just the core few.
Mm-hmm. Likely encompassing leaders from the major elven realms. You've got Círdan, representing Lindon and the Havens, Elrond for Rivendell, Galadriel, and Celeborn, tied to Lothlorien.
And potentially others, maybe their chief advisors or other significant figures.
Entirely plausible, the article suggests. But the absolute key takeaway, the main point Martinez makes, is that ambiguity. It seems even Tolkien himself hadn't fully maybe settled all the details.
Like the exact membership list, or even how one became a member of the Third Age Council.
Exactly. Wasn't all nailed down, perhaps even in his own mind entirely.
Which, in a way, leaves space for imagination, for interpretation.
It does. But this deep dive, using the insights from Martinez's article, helps ground that imagination in what the texts actually do provide.
Yeah, it's that shortcut we aim for. Getting you quickly to those core bits of knowledge from the source, cutting through the assumptions to see what's actually written versus what's been inferred or adapted over time.
And it moves us beyond just focusing on the, 4 or 5 most famous names to appreciating the potential scale and even the public awareness of this really significant body in Middle-earth's history.
Absolutely. And thinking about that scale and that awareness, here's maybe a final thought based on this deep dive for you to mull over.
Okay.
Given that the White Council's existence was apparently known, maybe even among hobbits in the Shire, and given Martinez's suggestion that its size could have been over a dozen, perhaps several dozen elves and wizards,
Yeah.
how might that change things? How might that widespread awareness and that potentially vast network of members have truly shaped the fight against Sauron in the Third Age, in ways that went far beyond just the actions of the famous few we usually focus on?
That's a good question. A much wider web of influence and resistance.
Something to ponder next time you're thinking about the War of the Ring.